Hello YouTube, this is Johnny again, here to present you all with this week's aphorism. I've been making these for a little while now, and they do take quite a bit of behind-the-scenes preparation, reading, writing, editing the material, and so on. I know the production values don't look like it, but, actually I assume most of you are listening more than watching anyway, so I try to focus on making that part as good as I can, the content itself. But anyway, since I've been putting quite a bit of work into these YouTube videos, and since the last few have been fairly serious in tone, I thought I'd let myself indulge a little bit and delve into something that's a fun topic for me in particular, and I hope for everyone else as well. This one's going to require a little bit more prior information and storytelling before we get to the actual aphorism itself. Because unlike some of the other aphorisms I've unpacked, this one's a bit more modern, recent, and comes from a fictional tale, a video game actually. So it's well known who the author is, the context, and so on and so forth, but it requires some backstory. One thing I've learned actually from studying the art of aphorism itself is that often you just don't know who said it first, or the context of it, or even the origin of them sometimes at all. They're just anonymous or whatever. But when you get to more modern stuff, it makes it a bit easier to keep track. And this one comes from a video game I'm a big fan of, and I've beaten a few times actually, called Planescape Torment. Now, if you plan on playing this game in the future, just a heads up, there will be some spoilers, some spoiling going on, so you may want to pause this, knock out the game. It'll only take about 30 or 40 hours or so. If you've played it, you may enjoy this video, and talking about it a little bit. And even if you haven't or don't intend to, I think you'll still be able to appreciate the story and some of the ideas underlying it. I'd highly recommend it. In some ways, it plays almost more like a novel than a game. It gets into some interesting questions about life, death, immortality, truth, treason, loyalty, tyranny, and all the other good stuff of philosophy. The script is astonishingly long and complex for a video game. It's about 800,000 words, actually. It was written by Chris Avallone and Colin McComb. It's really a lot of fun to play around with the different dialogue trees and so on. It has a lot of replay value because there's so much detail in it, and you can't unlock everything in one playthrough. So, like I said, spoilers and context ahead, and then we'll get to the actual aphorism and some thoughts about it and some of its real-world relevance, right? Now, the game itself takes place in the old 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons Planescape setting, a multiverse of practically infinite planes of metaphysics and existence, with a strange city called Sigil sitting at the top of an infinite spire at the literal and metaphysical crossroads of them all. Sound bizarre? Well, it is. And it's a lot of fun to tumble about in it, in your imagination, because so many of the planes are filled with such bizarre things, and really often breathtaking if you have the imagination for them. I don't want to focus too much on the setting, though, except for a couple of things. A couple of places. Sigil, the city I mentioned, and Limbo, a plane I will describe in a little bit later. Now, I'm going to try to do this with as little spoiling as possible, but again, and for the third time, so there's no excuses, spoilers are incoming, okay? In the game itself, your character, the nameless one, wakes up on a slab in a mortuary in Sigil, with no memory of his past life. He shortly thereafter meets a floating skull named Morte, who notices that he has all these tattoos over him, over the nameless one, that sort of cryptically describe what happened, and that this isn't the first time he's died, and so on. And then off you go on your adventure to figure out all this stuff, like why are you still alive, what the hell sort of place is this, why is there a talking skull, why do I have tattoos all over my body, etc., etc. You leave the mortuary. You go out into the city of Sigil, more stuff happens, and eventually, but still fairly early on, you're likely to meet a curious fellow in a bar in Sigil. This is Dakon, a so-called Githzerai, which look sort of like taller, thinner, more alien-looking elves or something, and are possessed of psychic powers, who, if you want, becomes a companion and goes along with you on your adventure. Now, throughout the game, you can get something of a history of the Githzerai people through dialogue with Dakon. The gist of this story is that way back in the ancient past, there was a parent race called the Gith. that were enslaved by these absolutely horrific monstrosities called illithids. Imagine something like Cthulhu, but instead of being a single giant, incomprehensible squid monster from space, illithids are, thousands and thousands of smaller, human-sized, incomprehensible squid monsters from space, little Cthulhus that eat brains and are possessed of psychic powers. They consider themselves to be the multiverse's master race, and they act like it, enslaving or eating the brains of any other sentient life they encounter. Now, apparently in this distant past, the Gith were enslaved. However, over time, they eventually developed some resistance to the enthralling nature of the illithid mind powers, and were eventually led by a woman named Gith, where I guess the whole of their race gets its name, to revolution against their masters, which succeeded, and the illithid empire was pushed back to a shadow of its former self. However, this was not enough for Gith, who was desirous of destroying all of the illithids and making war on anyone who could, even possibly re-enslave her people. So, in a lot of ways, the followers of Gith were still enslaved, I mean, they were basically permanently conscripted into a permanent revolution without end. There was a man named Zerthamon who believed that this state of affairs would destroy and corrupt them, and who wanted to find peace after the revolution. He thought that it would tear their people apart, His followers and the followers of Gith did indeed clash, and there was a mighty civil war. Eventually, the two groups went their separate ways. There's two of them. Now, you have the Githyanki, the followers of Gith in their language, that fled to the astral plane, while the Githzerai, which means something like those who reject Gith, fled to the plane of limbo. So already we've got some interesting themes here about war and peace, independence and power, and so on. Maybe I'll go into that a little more specifically in another video, but the important thing regarding this week's aphorism has to do with limbo and the strange qualities of the plane for our friends, the Githzerai. Now, limbo is a totally chaotic place. Living there would be something like living in a Salvador Dali painting that stretched on and on infinitely with floating islands everywhere and some kind of psychedelic tie-dyed version of space. To survive in such a place, it has to be manipulated directly by the thoughts and wills of its inhabitants, which, happens to work out pretty well for the psychic abilities that the Githzerai have, right? They're able to use their powers to carve out an existence, even in such a place like that. And this is kind of the theme for the rest of the video here, that thoughts and allegiances have major impacts in the world. At root, everything we do comes down to how we think about things and our reactions to our environment that are built up out of culture, our previous experiences with our environment, self-discipline and programming, etc. So life in limbo is extremely dangerous simply due to the irrationality of it, of its chaotic nature. It requires a strong will to survive in such a place. Dakon's backstory is that he was an important leader in a big Githzerai city in limbo, and he had something of a crisis of faith and of will, which led to the city being torn asunder by the fundamentally chaotic forces of the plane. In the exposition of this story, at some point, he says this, which is actually our aphorism of the week. He says, "A divided mind is an unfocused mind. A divided mind fractures walls and weakens stone. Many divided minds may destroy a city." So, I just want to say it one more time, because I think it's such a cool quote. "A divided mind is an unfocused mind. A divided mind fractures walls and weakens stone. Many divided minds may destroy a city." And this is exactly what happened.